Convoy to Pelican Bay, inside California's notorious Supermax prison exposed, true crime documentary. The road to the edge of the map. If you think you've seen California's darkest secrets, you haven't been on this road yet. Hit subscribe, like, and comment, because what you're about to hear may change how you see American justice forever. The convoy rolled out before dawn, 3 unmarked vans snaking north on Highway 101 as coastal fog pressed low against the asphalt. Inside the lead vehicle sat a man who had spent more of his adult life in isolation than in open air. His wrists were shackled, his ankles chained, and his eyes fixed on a point somewhere far beyond the fogged-over window. Officially, he was known only by his prison number, but among California's correctional staff he was whispered about as the Architect. He wasn't a gang shot caller in the traditional sense. He was the kind of strategist who built power structures that outlasted raids, transfers, and informants. Today was supposed to be the state's answer to that, a high-risk transfer to Pelican Bay's security housing unit. Following behind him were 2 more vans, one carrying men labeled validated gang associates, the other stacked with boxes of sealed evidence, paperwork, and a single battered crate of surveillance tapes. These weren't ordinary transfers. This was the tail end of a 2-year undercover investigation into an alleged gladiator fight network, guards pitting inmates against each other in orchestrated yard battles, then suppressing or destroying the evidence. Officially, most of these allegations had been buried in old lawsuits like Madrid versus Gomez. Unofficially, investigators suspected a new generation of officers had learned from the old playbook. The convoy's escort cars bore no insignia, just flashing blue strobes under their grills. Coastal redwoods loomed over the road like sentinels. Out here, the highway narrows, cell service fades, and even the air smells different: salt, pine, diesel. Crescent City, population 6,000, sits at the far northwestern tip of California. For prisoners and staff alike, Pelican Bay isn't just a facility, it's an exile. As the miles ticked by, the lead investigator in the follow car, Special Agent Mia Valdez of the California Inspector General's office, flipped through a thin manila folder. Inside were memos, grainy photocopies of medical reports, and a single Polaroid. A prisoner named Von Dorch, his skin blistered from scalding water after a 1992 incident guards had once claimed was an accident. Valdez had been a child then. Now she was driving into the heart of the same institution to see if history was repeating itself. The suspect sitting shackled in the first van had been instrumental in smuggling out documents, unconfirmed but damning, describing clandestine fight cards, betting pools, and intimidation campaigns. He had insisted on protective custody at Pelican Bay, claiming both guards and rival gangs wanted him silenced. His plea deal was sealed, his name redacted from public filings, and yet somehow a photograph of him had appeared on a prison gang message board the week before. Someone inside the system was leaking. The fog thickened as the convoy turned off the highway onto a 2-lane road flanked by razor wire fencing and signs warning of deadly force authorized. Guard towers appeared through the mist like concrete monoliths. This was the approach road every new inmate dreaded. From above, Pelican Bay looks like an austere gray sprawl shaped like a giant X. Inside that X sits the SHU, a labyrinth of windowless pods where thousands once spent 22 to 24 hours a day in isolation. Valdez felt the weight of the files in her lap. The 2011 hunger strike had started here, with men in the SHU refusing food for weeks to protest indefinite solitary confinement and debriefing policies. 2 years later, the 2013 strike spread across California to 30,000 inmates, the largest prison hunger strike in U.S. history. She had read transcripts of letters smuggled out, men describing hallucinations, paranoia, and despair. Now she was walking into the very blocks where those letters were written. In the first van, the Architect glanced at his reflection in the steel mesh over the window. His face betrayed nothing, but his pulse hammered. He had spent years learning how to use Pelican Bay's invisible channels, coded mail, legal visits, and corrupt staff, to move information and orders across the state. When the hunger strikes erupted, he had seen an opportunity, leverage public outrage to consolidate his power. But somewhere along the way his network cracked. An associate flipped, evidence was seized, and now he was a state witness in a case that could embarrass California's Department of Corrections at the highest level. The gatehouse came into view. Guards in riot gear watched as the convoy approached. Their visors hid their eyes, but their stance spoke volumes: tense, unsmiling, prepared. A gust of wind rattled the razor wire. One officer raised a handheld camera and began recording the arrival. Valdez noted the timestamp. Documentation mattered here. Every second might end up in court. As the vans rolled through the Sally Port, the heavy gate clanged shut behind them. For a moment there was only the sound of engines idling. Inside the processing bay, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. Valdez stepped out of her car and felt the temperature drop. Even in daylight, Pelican Bay felt dim. She followed the transfer team as they unloaded the shackled men. Each inmate was strip-searched, photographed, and issued a new orange jumpsuit stamped PBS-PSHU. The architect was last. He walked slowly, chains clinking, and locked eyes with Valdez for a fraction of a second, a look not of fear but of calculation. "You think you're safe in here?" he murmured, voice low enough that only she could hear. "You're not. None of us are." Valdez's stomach tightened. She had spent months preparing for this operation, but in that moment the walls seemed to lean inward. Pelican Bay wasn't just a prison. It was an ecosystem of power, secrecy, and violence that could swallow evidence, careers, even lives. She signed the intake log, handed over the evidence crate, and followed a correctional lieutenant down a corridor lined with steel doors. The lieutenant spoke in clipped sentences about cell assignments and security levels, but Valdez only half listened. Her eyes kept drifting to the surveillance cameras mounted at every corner. Some had tiny red LEDs blinking. Others were dark. She wondered which ones were actually recording. They reached a control booth overlooking a row of SHU cells. From here she could see the pod layout: 8 windowless cells arranged around a concrete dog-run yard covered by chain-link roof. No bars, no contact, just solid steel doors with narrow food slots. This was where men had spent decades in near total isolation. This was where hunger strikes had begun, and where, if her sources were right, new abuses were taking place under cover of bureaucracy. The lieutenant opened a side door into an interview room. 2 chairs, a bolted-down table, a single camera in the corner. Valdez set down her file. The architect was brought in, chains removed from his wrists but not his ankles. He sat, folded his hands and smiled faintly. "You wanted me here," he said. "Now what?" Valdez studied him. She had reviewed hours of intercepted phone calls, decoded letters, and testimony from confidential informants. If he was telling the truth, she held the key to a scandal bigger than Madrid versus Gomez. If he was lying, she might be walking into a trap. "Tell me about the fights," she said. "Names, dates, staff involved." He leaned back, eyes glinting. "You really think it's just fights? You don't even know the half of it." A knock at the door interrupted them. Another officer stepped in and handed Valdez a sealed envelope. "Came through internal mail an hour ago," he said. "Marked urgent." She opened it. Inside was a single photograph, a Polaroid of herself, taken that morning as she left her Sacramento office. No note, no explanation. Just her image time-stamped. Her pulse spiked. The architect chuckled softly. "Told you," he whispered. "You're already in it." Outside the interview room, the corridor hummed with fluorescent light. Somewhere down the block, a door clanged and a voice shouted in Spanish. Valdez felt the hair rise on her arms. Someone inside Pelican Bay was watching her every move. And as she folded the photograph back into the envelope, she realized the investigation she thought she controlled might already be compromised, and that whatever secrets lay hidden in this Supermax were about to cost more than she'd planned to pay. Shadows in the SHU. Valdez held the Polaroid in her trembling hand, the glossy surface reflecting the buzzing fluorescent light. The timestamp at the bottom was precise, 6:17 a.m., minutes before she had even reached the state office garage in Sacramento. Whoever had taken the picture had been close enough to catch her looking down at her phone. The message was clear. Someone knew her movements in real time. Across the table, the architect sat with a faint smirk, as if the walls of Pelican Bay were whispering secrets only he could hear. His shackled ankles shifted under the table with a metallic rasp. He leaned forward just slightly, enough for the camera in the corner to pick up his expression. "You think you came here to investigate me," he said softly. "But you're investigating them. And they don't like it." Valdez steadied her breathing. She had handled armed standoffs, double homicides, even an arson case that nearly took her life. But this was different. Here she was sealed inside a fortress built to keep the worst in, and perhaps to keep the truth out. She slipped the Polaroid back into the envelope, closed the flap, and tucked it into her inside jacket pocket. "Who sent this?" she asked. "Someone who doesn't want you poking around," the architect replied. "Could be a guard. Could be a lawyer. Could be somebody you've never even heard of. All I know is if you're holding that picture, you're already marked." A correctional lieutenant opened the door and signaled time was up. Valdez stood, smoothing the front of her blazer. "We're not done," she said. The architect tilted his head. "No," he said. "We're just beginning." Outside the interview room, the corridor stretched long and gray, lined with sealed doors. Through narrow vision ports she glimpsed faces, some tattooed with gang symbols, some gaunt from years without sunlight. The SHU's silence was deceptive. Beneath it, tension coiled like a live wire. The lieutenant guided her to the staff wing where she'd been assigned an office. "You'll be working out of here," he said, swiping a keycard to open a steel door. Inside was a small room with a desk, a government-issue laptop and a black rotary phone. The window faced only another wall. No view of the yard, no natural light. He dropped a stack of intake files on the desk and left without a word. Valdez sat down and opened the top file. It contained disciplinary reports on incidents labeled mutual combat, all occurring in the exercise cages over the past 6 months. Each file included injury photos but no staff witness statements. She flipped through them, noting the pattern. Rival gang members accidentally placed in adjacent cages, weapons appearing out of nowhere, medical responses delayed. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "Stop digging or you'll be next." No punctuation, no emoji, no signature. She locked the screen and slipped it face down on the desk. That evening she joined a routine tier walk with 2 correctional officers, Ramirez and Dupree, under the pretext of familiarization. The SHU corridors echoed with the hollow clank of boots. Each cell door had a narrow window no wider than a postcard. Inside, prisoners watched them pass like animals watching zookeepers. Some muttered curses under their breath, others stared in silence. They paused at a door where an older inmate with deep-set eyes sat cross-legged on the floor, hands resting on his knees. His nameplate read Sandoval. According to the file, he had spent 19 years in solitary, validated as a Northern Structure Gang associate. Yet his disciplinary record for the past decade was clean. "Sandoval," Valdez called softly. "Do you know why I'm here?" He lifted his gaze, his irises pale from lack of sunlight. "You're here because they're still doing it," he said. "But you already know that." "Doing what?" "The fights," he said. "Different guards, same game. They pick who goes in which cage. Sometimes they give us shanks, sometimes they just wait. Then they bet. They always bet." "Do you have proof?" she asked. He smiled without humor. "Proof gets lost. Cameras go dark. Paperwork disappears. But ask about Seayard last winter. Ask about Vargas and Ortiz. You'll see." Ramirez shifted uncomfortably. "We should keep moving," he muttered. Valdez took a step closer to the door. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Sandoval's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because they're going to kill him." "Kill who?" "The one you brought in today," he said. "The snitch. They won't let him testify. They're already planning it." Before Valdez could respond, Dupree tapped her arm. "Let's go," he said sharply. "Now." They continued down the corridor. Behind them Sandoval resumed his cross-legged silence. Back in her office, Valdez wrote down everything she'd heard. She pulled up the prison's internal camera logs for Seayard last winter. Several clips were marked "maintenance outage." The few remaining showed grainy footage of inmates being escorted but no fights. She flagged them for forensic recovery later. She reached for the phone to call her Sacramento supervisor but hesitated. The Polaroid, the text message, the camera outages. Someone inside the system was already steps ahead of her. If she moved too fast she might tip them off. She needed leverage. She decided to visit the evidence room. Officially it was off-limits after hours, but her badge granted temporary access. The corridor leading there smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant. A single bulb flickered overhead. She swiped her card and entered. Rows of metal shelves lined the room, stacked with boxes labeled by case number. In the far corner she found the crate of surveillance tapes transferred with the convoy. She lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of unmarked VHS cassettes, some with dates scrawled in black marker, others blank. She picked one at random and slid it into the ancient VCR on the side table. Static filled the screen, then resolved into a grainy overhead view of an exercise cage. 2 inmates stood facing each other, fists clenched. A guard in riot gear stood just outside the cage. Another figure, partially off camera, appeared to toss something between the bars. The fight erupted instantly. One inmate slashed the other with a makeshift blade. The guard did not intervene. Valdez's pulse raced. She rewound, played it again. The tape bore last month's date. This wasn't history. This was happening now. She copied the footage onto a USB drive and slipped it into her pocket. As she did, the door clicked shut behind her. She spun around. Dupree stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "You shouldn't be in here," he said. "I'm authorized," she replied. "Not at night you're not," he said. "Let's go." He reached for the light switch. In the brief darkness, Valdez felt the air shift. A second set of footsteps. Someone else in the room. She tightened her grip on the USB drive. The lights flicked back on. Dupree stood alone, but the aisle behind him was empty now. Valdez forced a calm tone. "I'm done here," she said. "Escorting me out?" He nodded curtly and led her back to the corridor. The door locked with a heavy click. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing. Later, in the staff wing, she slipped into the break room where Ramirez sat drinking coffee from a paper cup. He looked up as she entered. "You found something," he said. "Why do you think that?" "Because you look like you just saw a ghost," he said. Valdez lowered her voice. "Is it true?" "The fights." Ramirez hesitated, eyes darting to the door. "I've been here 15 years, he said. "I've seen things. Things that don't make sense. Inmates moved into wrong yards. Cameras down at the wrong time. Paperwork changed after the fact. You think that's coincidence?" "Who's behind it?" she asked. He shook his head. "Don't ask me that. Just watch your back." The next morning Valdez requested a meeting with Warden Clark, a stiff, gray-haired man with a reputation for iron discipline. His office was decorated with commendations and photographs of award ceremonies. A faint smell of cigar smoke lingered. "I've been reviewing incident reports," Valdez began. "There are irregularities. Camera outages. Inmates injured. I need full access to staff schedules and surveillance backups." Clark's jaw tightened. "This is a high-security facility," he said. "We manage extremely dangerous individuals. You're a guest here, Agent Valdez. Don't mistake your badge for authority over my prison. With respect, Warden, the Inspector General's office has oversight." "And with respect," he cut her off, "we're in the middle of budget cuts, staff shortages, and political grandstanding. You come in here chasing old ghosts and you're going to get people hurt. Or worse." "Someone sent me a picture of myself this morning," she said. "Taken outside my home. Inside your system." "Explain that." He blinked once, slowly. "If you have a personal security concern, contact local law enforcement. Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Valdez left his office feeling the walls close in again. Outside, the fog had burned off, revealing a clear, cold sky. Inmates in the yard paced in small circles under the chain-link roof, heads down. From above, the scene looked orderly. From inside, it felt like a fuse waiting to be lit. That afternoon she returned to Sandoval's cell with a hidden microphone in her pocket. "You said they're going to kill him," she whispered. "How?" Sandoval leaned close to the door. "The showers," he said. "They'll make it look like a fight. Like Dorch all over again." "When?" "Soon," he said. "Maybe tonight." Valdez felt her pulse hammer. The architect was scheduled for his first shower rotation in the SHU that evening. She needed to act. She hurried back to her office and dialed a secure number. "This is Valdez," she said. "Initiate emergency witness protection transfer. Subject Alpha. Pelican Bay SHU. Immediate." Static on the line. Then a voice, "Request denied. Subject status changed. Already released to general population." Her blood ran cold. What? Who authorized that? But the line went dead. She bolted from her office, heart pounding. Down the corridor, alarms began to wail, a rising, keening sound that turned the air electric. Red lights flashed. Officers ran past her toward the SHU. Through the small windows she glimpsed chaos. Doors opening, inmates shouting, water spraying from broken pipes. She pushed through to the control booth. "Where is he?" she demanded. A sergeant stared at the monitor. "Tier C," he said. "Shower run." On the screen, grainy footage showed the architect being led, hands cuffed behind him, toward a tiled shower stall. Another inmate was already inside. The camera flickered, then went dark. Valdez grabbed the radio from the sergeant's belt. "Lock it down," she shouted. "Get him out of there." No response. Only static. She sprinted down the hall toward Tier C. The smell of bleach and metal filled her nose. She rounded a corner and collided with Ramirez. "They've cut the cameras," he said. "We're blind." "Where?" she gasped. "Showers," he said. They ran together, boots pounding the concrete. Ahead, the sound of shouting grew louder. A door slammed. Valdez drew in a breath, tasting coppery adrenaline. She didn't know who she could trust. Guards, gangs, even her own agency, Someone wanted the witness silenced. They reached the shower block. Water sprayed across the floor from a busted pipe. Steam rose, blurring the view. Through it she saw two figures struggling, one in orange, one in white. A blade flashed. Blood splattered the tile. Valdez lunged forward, but Ramirez grabbed her arm. "You can't," he shouted. She wrenched free, slipped on the wet floor, caught herself on the doorframe. Inside the stall the architect collapsed to his knees, hands still cuffed. The other inmate raised the blade for a final strike. A shot rang out. The attacker dropped, weapon clattering. Two tactical officers stormed in, tackling both men to the ground. Valdez pressed against the cold tile, heart hammering. The architect lay bleeding but alive. His eyes met hers for a split second. "Told you," he whispered. "Told you." Then the officers hauled him away, leaving a smear of blood across the floor. Hours later, in the infirmary, Valdez stood by his bed. The architect's face was pale, his breathing shallow. An oxygen tube ran beneath his nose. Guards stood at the door, rifles slung. "You were right," she said softly. "They tried." He opened his eyes. "Not tried," he murmured. "Started." Valdez felt her pulse hammer. The architect was scheduled for his first shower rotation in the SHU that evening. She needed to act. She hurried back to her office and dialed a secure number. "This is Valdez," she said. "Initiate emergency witness protection transfer. Subject Alpha. Pelican Bay SHU. Immediate." Static on the line. Then a voice. "Request denied. Subject status changed. Already released to general population." Her blood ran cold. What? Who authorized that? But the line went dead. She bolted from her office, heart pounding. Down the corridor, alarms began to wail, a rising, keening sound that turned the air electric. Red lights flashed. Officers ran past her toward the SHU. Through the small windows she glimpsed chaos. Doors opening, inmates shouting, water spraying from broken pipes. She pushed through to the control booth. "Where is he?" she demanded. A sergeant stared at the monitor. "Tier C," he said. "Shower run." On the screen, grainy footage showed the architect being led, hands cuffed behind him, toward a tiled shower stall. Another inmate was already inside. The camera flickered, then went dark. Valdez grabbed the radio from the sergeant's belt. "Lock it down," she shouted. "Get him out of there." No response. Only static. She sprinted down the hall toward Tier C. The smell of bleach and metal filled her nose. She rounded a corner and collided with Ramirez. "They've cut the cameras," he said. "We're blind." "Where?" she gasped. "Showers," he said. They ran together, boots pounding the concrete. Ahead, the sound of shouting grew louder. A door slammed. Valdez drew in a breath, tasting coppery adrenaline. She didn't know who she could trust. Guards, gangs, even her own agency. Someone wanted the witness silenced. They reached the shower block. Water sprayed across the floor from a busted pipe. Steam rose, blurring the view. Through it she saw two figures struggling, one in orange, one in white. A blade flashed. Blood splattered the tile. Valdez lunged forward, but Ramirez grabbed her arm. "You can't," he shouted. She wrenched free, slipped on the wet floor, caught herself on the doorframe. Inside the stall the architect collapsed to his knees, hands still cuffed. The other inmate raised the blade for a final strike. A shot rang out. The attacker dropped, weapon clattering. Two tactical officers stormed in, tackling both men to the ground. Valdez pressed against the cold tile, heart hammering. The architect lay bleeding but alive. His eyes met hers for a split second. "Told you," he whispered. "Told you." Then the officers hauled him away, leaving a smear of blood across the floor. Hours later, in the infirmary, Valdez stood by his bed. The architect's face was pale, his breathing shallow. An oxygen tube ran beneath his nose. Guards stood at the door, rifles slung. "You were right," she said softly. "They tried." He opened his eyes. "Not tried," he murmured. "Started." "Started what?" He coughed, wincing. "You think it's about fights. It's bigger. It's about control. About who really runs this place." "Who?" His lips moved but no sound came. Then his eyelids fluttered shut. Valdez turned to the nurse. "Keep him under watch," she said. "No one in or out without my clearance." As she left the infirmary, her phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. Too late. Attached was a new photo, the USB drive she had hidden in her jacket pocket, lying on her office desk. She reached inside her jacket. The pocket was empty. Her hands shook. Someone had been in her office. Someone had her evidence. Down the hall, alarms began to sound again. This time they weren't practice drills. This time, something was coming undone inside Pelican Bay, and Valdez was caught in the middle. The last corridor. Sirens wailed through the SHU like an air raid. Red strobes painted the concrete walls in pulses of light. Valdez ran toward her office, heart hammering. Someone had stolen her USB, the only copy of the fight footage, and sent her a picture to prove it. The message was unmistakable: "We control everything inside these walls." She skidded to a stop at the door. It was ajar. Papers littered the floor, drawers yanked open. Her laptop sat dead, its hard drive missing. On the desk, in place of the USB, lay a single playing card, the Queen of Spades, a thin smear of blood along its edge. Ramirez burst in behind her, sweat streaking his forehead. "It's locked down," he said. "Whole prison's on edge." Another incident in the yard. "They've got my evidence," Valdez said. "We're blind without it." He glanced at the card. "That's not random. That's a marker. Someone's warning you." "Or taunting me," she muttered. Over the intercom came the warden's voice, terse and strained. "All staff to posts. Emergency protocols in effect. This is not a drill." Valdez shoved the card into her pocket. "Where's the architect?" she demanded. "Infirmary," Ramirez said. "But word's out. Half the SHU thinks he's a snitch. The other half wants him gone before he talks." She pictured Sandoval's pale eyes, his warning about the showers, and realized he hadn't been telling her just to help. He'd been telling her the countdown had started. If the architect died, the whole investigation would evaporate. They sprinted down the corridor toward the infirmary. The sirens throbbed, drowning out thought. Through the narrow windows she glimpsed movement in the yards. Prisoners banging on doors, guards rushing, a flicker of flames from a burning trash bin. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with Dupree. His uniform was damp with sweat, his eyes darting. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed. "They're moving him." "Who authorized that?" Valdez snapped. "Higher than me," he said. "Internal Affairs, Special Transport, I don't know. They're taking him out the back." Valdez felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Where?" Dupree hesitated. "Old intake tunnel." She and Ramirez ran, boots slamming on the concrete. The old intake tunnel was supposed to be sealed, a relic from when Pelican Bay was first built, used briefly for high-risk transfers before being mothballed. Few staff even remembered it existed. They reached the access door. A faint draft of cold air leaked through the gap. Valdez yanked it open. A narrow corridor stretched into darkness, lit only by intermittent emergency bulbs. Water dripped from the ceiling. Chains clinked somewhere ahead. They moved quietly, their footsteps echoing. Voices floated back, low, urgent. Valdez crept forward until she could see shapes. 2 guards in black uniforms escorting a gurney. On it lay the architect, wrists and ankles strapped. His eyes fluttered open. For an instant he saw her and mouthed a single word: "Run." Valdez stepped into the light. "Stop," she called. "Inspector General's office. Release the prisoner." The guards turned. Their badges bore no names, just the insignia of Special Operations. One reached for his belt. Ramirez raised his hands. "Easy," he said. "No one has to get hurt." Valdez's eyes flicked to the gurney. The architect struggled weakly against his straps. "They're not taking me to court," he rasped. "They're taking me to—" His voice cut off as one guard pressed a cloth over his face. Valdez lunged forward. "No," she shouted. The nearest guard swung his arm, knocking her against the wall. Her head hit concrete. Stars exploded in her vision. She slid to her knees, tasting blood. Ramirez tried to intervene but was shoved back, his radio clattering to the floor. In that moment Valdez's hand brushed the Queen of Spades in her pocket. An idea flickered. She pulled it out, held it up. "I know what this means," she said hoarsely. "You're playing the same game as the fights. But this time you're on camera." The guards froze just for a heartbeat. Above them, hidden in a vent, a tiny blinking red LED winked. One of the covert cameras Valdez had smuggled in with a sympathetic tech the week before. It was transmitting live to a secure satellite uplink outside the prison. Everything happening in the tunnel was being recorded off-site. "Step away from the gurney," she ordered. "Now." The first guard's jaw clenched. "You don't understand," he said. "This place doesn't run without us." "Then explain it to a jury," she said. Ramirez moved to her side, picking up his radio. "Control, this is Officer Ramirez," he said. "We have an unauthorized extraction in the old intake tunnel. Request immediate response. Static. Then a voice. Acknowledged. Response en route. The guards exchanged a glance. One released the cloth, letting it drop. The architect gasped for air. The other loosened the straps slightly but didn't step back. Far off, boots thundered, a team approaching. The guards looked at Valdez, then at the approaching lights and slowly raised their hands. "We're dead either way," one muttered. "You don't know what you've started." Hours later, the tunnel was sealed. The architect was moved under federal protection to an undisclosed location. Dupree was arrested. Warden Clark was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. For the first time in decades, Pelican Bay's most closely guarded corridors were being opened to outside auditors. Valdez sat in a drab motel room on the edge of Crescent City, watching the sun rise over the misty redwoods. On the table lay her laptop, replaced, hard drive restored, and a fresh USB containing the tunnel footage. Outside, seagulls cried. The ocean smelled of salt and diesel. Her phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "You think it's over?" "It's not." Attached was a photo of Sandoval, still in his SHU cell, a faint smile on his lips. Beneath it, 3 words: "Your move next." She stared at the screen, feeling the weight of the case settle on her shoulders. The hunger strikes, the lawsuits, the fights, they were symptoms of something deeper. Pelican Bay wasn't just a prison. It was a system within a system, a place where power flowed through hidden channels and everyone, guards, inmates, investigators, played by rules never written down. She closed the phone and looked out the window. Fog rolled in off the Pacific, swallowing the coastline. In the distance a siren wailed, faint and forlorn. Somewhere inside those walls, men were still locked in concrete boxes, waiting. Somewhere in Sacramento, someone higher up was already spinning the narrative. Valdez exhaled slowly. "If you think this story was intense," she murmured, "you're not ready for the next one." She slid the USB into an envelope addressed to a federal prosecutor she trusted, sealed it, and dropped it into the motel's outgoing mail slot. Then she picked up her go-bag and walked out into the mist, leaving behind the Queen of Spades on the table. The camera of her mind lingered on it, a small dark symbol of a much larger game, as the door clicked shut.